You're right. All right, everyone's filtering in here. See some familiar names. You can see some very unfamiliar names. Good. We like that. Today, we're here to talk about timeshares and how it's the best investment that you can possibly make for your family. No, obviously, we're here to talk about special needs trust today. A long time with us, Phil Clark out of Indiana. And for those of you who don't know me, I'm Mike Bennett. I help run the support team at Encore. I'd love to see, yeah, wow, some of you, oh, wow, come on. All right. Who's trying to see where some of you others are from here? No, but today is meant to be, it's if you're here for a sales pitch, you're in the wrong place. We're here to dive deep on special needs trusts. We do want to showcase Phil, who's been, again, a longtime advisor with us, probably done 50, 60 plans with us at least. I should have had a count on that beforehand, but it's a lot. And I'm going to do a full introduction on him, but we also, I am going to briefly introduce him, and then I'll let him tell you more about what he does and why we thought he was the perfect fit to come onto this webinar today. We won't penalize those of you that got here on time, and we'll get started here. So again, my name is Mike Bennett. I run the support team at Encore Estate Plans. And today we have Phil Clark joining us. So Phil, why don't you tell us a little bit about you and your firm?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm glad to be here and glad to share with you all. So my firm, Enable Special Needs Planning, we focus on, as the name says, special needs planning. And the reason behind that is I have a personal connection with this community. My sister Sarah has Down syndrome, and it's really why I have a unique approach about what planning for families like mine should be. I can get into some of the backstory and more deeper throughout this conversation if you guys have questions, but there were two things that I saw that was a problem as I entered the financial planning industry in 2008, because my focus was always to serve families like mine. And the two main pieces that were problems that I saw were, one, planning was only focused on what happens when my parents pass away. That was the start, and that was the end of the conversation. And that's how financial planners usually approach helping families like ours plan. And obviously, my perspective as a proud big brother, I look at planning and say, how can we provide this child that we're planning for an abundant life today and every day in the future? But another big piece of what we do, and a big problem that I saw in the industry, was that planning was fragmented. Planning was only focused on tiny areas of a family's plan, and with the hopes that somebody else was going to build something else that complemented it. And making sure everything connected. So really what we are doing now as a consulting group is helping be the general contractor of a family's plan, looking at the hundreds of moving pieces that have to be aligned for families like ours and making sure that they all work. We look at the estate plans through Encore, but we also look through so many different lenses of an entire family's plan to make sure that it's actually working for the family.
Right. Well, and one of the reasons that we've worked together so closely with Phil is we do believe that we're the only provider that even addresses special needs trusts at all. And so for those of you who don't know, every plan that you do through Encore, it does have the right to convert any share to a special needs trust, or as Phil definitely knows, that you can leave things to a beneficiary within a special needs trust. I am going to go in a little bit later today to tell you about a beta program that we are launching, standalone special needs trusts for people who need that. And we'll discuss some of the differences that go into that versus our current offering. But it's something where we do feel like that this is an underserved community. And it's something that there's just so many opportunities to do just amazing planning for families that need it, where you can make a genuine difference in their lives too. And so I don't need to tell Phil that's his practice. And so I'm basically going to ask Phil a lot of questions, but one housekeeping item that we did put in the chat there is if you do have any questions throughout, we do have our Q&A that's up there. We also have our live chat. So we will be able to see all those things. If we feel like it's something that's going to be good for what we're currently talking about, we'll answer right then and there. We may just quickly address it though and let you know that we'll be addressing things at the very end. So there we go. And this, before the question gets asked, yes, this webinar is being recorded. So yeah, we can get out copies of anything relevant later on today. So without further ado, everybody talks about comprehensive financial planning and what that entails. When it comes to special needs planning, what do you feel is like, what makes that comprehensive? I
Sure.
guess starting from like the when the person comes in to first meet with you to, I guess, when the financial plan and estate plan come into play?
Sure, absolutely. That's a great question. When I think of financial or comprehensive planning in my old hat of being the lead advisor for families, it was looking at everything, right? It was looking at the auto insurance, it was looking at the life insurance and making sure the investments are all working together. It's really looking at that bigger picture. But for families who have loved ones with special needs, comprehensive means so much more. There's so many more details that have to be aligned really perfectly to give families the peace of mind to know that their plan is actually going to work in the way that they intend it to do. And what I mean by that is we've got to look at different programs that the government offers. There's different government benefits programs that are available to families to move into to be able to support their child. But with that, there are so many other pieces that have to be perfectly planned for. For example, if a child is receiving what's called SSI or SSDI or any other types of government programs, that child can only have $2,000 or less in his or her name, or he or she is disqualified from that. And most of the time when families are planning, the child doesn't have assets in their name, but what happens if the parents are gone? And we've got to look at how this plan works today, but also stress test it in the future to make sure that the pieces are connecting, meaning no money is actually going to the child and we're actually leaving it to a special needs trust. So that's just one example of what comprehensive planning looks like. But I also start bigger picture. When I mentioned earlier, I saw planning being only focused on what happens when my parents pass away. And I looked at that as a proud big brother. I was like, no, planning's got to be so much bigger than that for my sister. You know, I tell families the most important step of our planning journey for our families is starting with the question of what does success look like? And when we talk about comprehensive, it's not just about the child. It's about everybody in the family. I want to understand, what does abundance look like? What do great opportunities look like in the future for the family and for the child? I also want to look long-term, short-term, midterm at that question. And we really dive deep into that because every advisor asks that question of what does success look like? What are you trying to accomplish? But we really want to dive 5, 6 layers deep to really understand, what does happiness, fulfillment, and purpose look like for the child they're planning for? That's a question that most families who have a loved one with special needs, haven't been asked from a professional. And if we can start there and start the conversations with abundance, that gives us a very clear roadmap of how all of these other pieces need to work together. And
And so,
all,
like, oh, go ahead.
well, I was gonna say I'll let you, but also from that, when we understand what does the future look like for the child, what are they hoping for, we can help them quantify what that means. And this is very important when we get into the special needs trust conversation, because great, you have a special needs trust, but how much do we need to fund it with? And if we don't start the conversations with what does abundance look like for your child, what does opportunities that are amazing for them look like, what does independence look like, we have no way of telling them, here's how much you actually need in the special needs trust.
It's interesting too, because I think most financial planning, you've got your clients, but I think when you're introducing special needs, like for you personally, I feel like you almost need to be involved in that conversation with your parents so you understood how you guys are going to be dealing with your sister. And so for the beneficiaries or for the children who are not the special needs trust beneficiary, I think there's a different angle there versus other non-special needs planning.
Sure, sure. And that's part of the comprehensive nature. That's a good point. Exactly. How do we make sure that the future care and support team, which is obviously many times siblings, how are they on the same page and understanding what the plan looks like and have involvement in this, so that when and if that transition happens, the people who need to step up and carry this plan on know exactly what their roles are, know exactly what the plan says, and know what's required of them.
Right. And I just remember from seeing so many of your plans too that, I mean, and more often than not, we're going to default to individuals being the trustee of that special needs trust. But then you use Empire Trust, and not a commercial for them, but what is something that they bring to the table that other corporate trustees may not?
Yeah, that's a great question. I'll take a step back there because that's a good point, again, on this comprehensive conversation that we're having here and what this looks like. When families are thinking through who's going to manage the money in the future, they might say, I think Uncle Bob could do it. And great, maybe Uncle Bob is a wonderful choice to be the trustee of the special needs trust, but I want to be able to educate families on, here's all of the responsibilities of this trustee of the special needs trust for the lifetime of the child. And oftentimes when I'm educating families on what that looks like, they sit back and they go, oh no, Uncle Bob cannot do this. We need somebody else. And so having a professional step in that understands the ins and outs of special needs trusts and government benefit regulations is so important. And having a group like Empire is wonderful because they get it. I can't tell you how many times I've seen a bank I'm not knocking on banks because I'm sure there's a lot of banks who can do this, but we have found that a lot of times when families have a trustee that aren't getting distributions out on time and are delaying certain things, it really is putting that child at risk. And so we've got to make sure that the trustee is responsive, but they also understand the complexities of how government benefits are intertwined in the entire plan.
Because one wrong move there can jeopardize those benefits. If the state or federal governments look at the wrong time, and now you got to go reapply and all those other things, then it's going to just be a disruption in benefits for the family. I've had situations when I was in private practice where we were able to get those things reinstated, but what a pain in the butt.
It's awful to try to apply the first
stuff.
time, and it's sometimes really, really hard to reapply once you've been kicked off those programs. And some state
Right.
programs have 10 to 15-year wait lists. So once you're on these programs, you got to do everything you can not to get unintentionally booted off.
Right, right. And yeah, I always feel like in these situations, it's well intentioned, but the execution on it has to be precise,
Absolutely.
which is huge to be able to bring that stuff in. Switching gears a little bit, do you feel like there's differences? Well, there's obviously differences, but I guess what are those differences when you're dealing with a minor special needs trust beneficiary versus one who's an adult potentially, or like levels of, I hate to say functionality, but that's the word I'm going to use, like functionality of their ability to care for themselves. What differences do you see there?
It's really individualized, and that's why the entire plan has to be coordinated in a way that also involves future trustees and guardians to know what this plan is, because the plan has got to follow the individual that we're planning for throughout their journey. And so if a child is 15, 16 years old right now, obviously they're not going to live on their own. But in the future, if the future guardians and trustees find an opportunity for the child to live independently and he or she has the ability to do that, the planned distributions have got to follow what opportunities look like. And I always tell families, I want the future guardian to be able to say yes to opportunities without having to think through how are we going to financially do this? And that's really where the intentionality of how much does this special needs trust need to have in it? It all is a direct reflection back to what does success for your child look like? What does abundance look like? Because in the future, as their abilities change and they become the version of themselves their parents saw, I want the future guardians to be able to say yes to those opportunities as they present themselves.
Right. And ultimately, all roads are caring for that special needs trust beneficiary. And on the guardian part of it, too, one thing that went out from the estate planning perspective is that you can always have in the documents that you usually, when you're talking about guardians, you're talking about minor beneficiaries, but you can make adjustments to the guardians where it's for minor beneficiaries or for anybody who you have legal guardianship over. You may still have to, those clients may still have to go back to courts to go get backup guardians name, but at least you're demonstrating what your intent is on something like that to have someone named. And so that's something that we could easily work through on that type of stuff. And I'm going to switch gears again now, kind of talking more about assets. So when, if a family has a bunch of assets, that's one thing, but I imagine that's not the norm. And I imagine we're going to go to life insurance and stuff like that. But like how do you help determine how much to put into these types of things? How much life insurance to get or how to fund a special needs trust?
Yeah, it's how do we look at this as a plan for the entire family, right? Because families who have a loved one with special needs really have to plan for two retirements. And a lot of families are looking at this saying, well, I can either retire or I can make sure I'm saving enough for money for my child. So that reason really alone or primarily is why I would encourage families to be proactive with this, because it doesn't have to be this either or. You don't have to choose retirement or the future financial security of your child. You can do both, but it takes, as everybody here on this webinar knows, very intentional planning early on to be able to do this. And a lot of times life insurance plays a role into this, because if we're looking at needing a special needs trust funded with, just for an example, $2.4 million, a lot of families don't have that just, in brokerage accounts ready to pass on, or they have other things they're doing with that money. And so how do we make sure and give families that peace of mind to know that if something happened to me, I know that my child's trust fund will be funded with enough money to be able to give them opportunities in the future. So, and how we get there to that number, again, goes back to this beginning step of our planning process. This vision alignment process is what we call it. What does success look like? And then taking what they are hoping to plan for their child and looking at basically a budget. What does lifestyle costs look like? Food, clothing, housing, and making sure that we can cash flow enough money every month from the special needs trust for their lifetime to be able to give them the quality of life that the parents want.
It's such a difference there because the life expectancy of someone with special could be the exact who doesn't have special needs, or it can be just wildly different. And so, I mean, I'm sure you're always erring on the side of caution. We did get a good question here. When parents or siblings cannot qualify for life insurance, what do we do? That's outside of hope and pray, I guess.
No, that's a great question. We see that from time to time, whether there's a health concern going on or, cash flow doesn't allow the amount of insurance that we need. We've got to do everything today to proactively set money aside and grow. No different if somebody's thinking through, how do I retire early? Well, we've got to be proactive in this. And so the earlier you can start for families who have a lot of special needs, the easier it becomes, especially in situations like that when life insurance maybe is off the table completely.
Yeah, or just completely cost prohibitive or something like that. I imagine, that's gonna obviously is gonna change things quite a bit. When you're working with other advisors and attorneys, how do you make sure that all this stuff is aligned, but not only aligned, but also implemented?
That is really where we've stepped into as a group. Obviously, my team, we have many CFPs on my team that are guiding families through the financial planning process. But what I have done, I've also built a team around making sure the tiny details connect. And I'll tell you what I mean by that. It wasn't too long ago, we had a family reach out to us. This happens a lot where they come to us and they see our content on Facebook or Instagram or wherever they're finding us. And they're saying, we like what you're saying. You have a different approach to planning than what we have entered into, except for we have a financial advisor, we have a special needs trust, we have the wills, we have the ABLE accounts. So we think we have everything, but we still don't feel certain that everything is working together. And that's really where our process shines, is to be able to look at everything not in a fragmented view, but all together to make sure it works. And this particular family, yeah, they had the right quote unquote stuff. But what we found when we dove deeper into it, the financial planner and the attorney were not communicating. And so there was a special needs trust established, but through beneficiary designations and through the estate plan, money was not actually going to get to the special needs trust. So parents, if they were to pass away, nothing was going there. And so those tiny, tiny details of making sure the plans are connected are so important when it comes to this.
Yeah, that makes a ton of sense. And you have an interesting angle on this type of stuff. Again, we're not trying to do a sales pitch here, but you consult with other financial advisors on this type of work, right?
I do. I have a lot of financial advisors reach out to us and say, we have this family we want to serve. We are not experts in this. Can you help us think through how this bigger picture works for the family? And just like every advisor that's on here today, every family is different, right? Everybody here knows that each individual client has a different circumstance and unique goals, but it's especially true with our families too, especially with all of the unique complexities of special needs planning. And so oftentimes I'll get called to help create that, or I guess be the general contractor of this plan to make sure the pieces are connected, to make sure that the intentions of the family of what they're trying to create actually happen through the government benefits, through the financial plan, through the funding sources that are end up going to fund the lifestyle of this child, going into the special needs trust. All those pieces have to be connected.
Yeah, I'm going to push back on you a little bit on this one here, Phil. It's for the benefit of the people on the webinar, I assure you. I agree with you that you're mostly the general contractor, but I think if an advisor is bringing you in, you're probably the subcontractor. So advisors on this call, don't worry, he's not going to poach your client. He's there helping you with this one issue with this client. So I want to make that very, very clear to the people on
Absolutely.
this
Absolutely.
call.
Yeah. And I make that
Yeah.
very clear for families or for advisors who come in and ask me to step in. This is your client. You guys are going to continue to run the assets under management and write the life insurance. I'm just there to help make sure that the plan actually works for what the families are wanting to do.
Fair.
And there's been a
You
lot of
mentioned one other.
advisors too who
Oh, go ahead.
have
Yeah.
have had a great opportunity with a family and they have not been able to close them yet. And I step in and I'm able to speak that language. I can talk about my personal experiences as a sibling and seeing what my parents did, but also seeing what other families are dealing with. I'm able to help a family have that peace to know that, okay, there's somebody that really truly understands what we're walking through. And for a lot of advisors, that's been that nudge to be able to allow the client or the prospect to say, yeah, we need to move forward because somebody is looking at all the tiny details. And that's what we need.
And then we got a question here, and it's from Ashley. If someone can get at least term insurance versus getting permanent insurance, do you suggest getting some policy in place and converting it later when financial situation improves? If you can get something, get it. That would be my guess on that.
Yeah. I mean, term insurance is wonderful. It bridges that gap for the what ifs, but we know that there's a expiration date on this. And a lot of families can't cash flow a permanent life insurance policy to be able to fully fund a trust. And so a term policy will bridge that gap of saying if something happens in this 20, 30-year time frame, we know it'll be covered. But we've also got to be proactive in this. So when financial situations change, having a life insurance carrier that you're representing that has a good conversion option is wonderful, because slowly over time we can convert that term into permanent insurance if possible to be able to meet that need of the special needs trust.
Right. And as you know, the family's financial situation and needs and stuff like that, you can balance all those types of things. Like you wouldn't just, again, I don't want to call it standard financial planning, but I'm going to say it, standard financial planning. And you touched on one little thing earlier that I want to dive into just for a couple minutes is ABLE accounts. What is an ABLE account? I'm sure most people on this call know, but go for it.
Yeah, absolutely. So I mentioned earlier, if an individual with special needs is receiving government benefits, they cannot have more than $2,000 in their name. And so that creates a challenge for families, one, how to save money for their child in their name, but also in the future, how do we allow this child to have more than $2,000, because we know it's going to take a lot more than that. So there's two options we have in shielding assets for the government benefits asset test. One is a special needs trust, and the other is an ABLE account. And ABLE accounts are state run. It's a federal program that they have allowed the states to kind of create their own programs with this, but you can save money above and beyond that $2,000 in these accounts and have them managed and growing in a tax deferred and tax-free manner when you take the money out that doesn't disqualify them from benefits.
Right. And eligibility, there's been, if I remember right, there's been a big rule change in 2026 that it used to be you have to be receiving SSI or SSDI, if I remember right, and then having a qualified disability. But there was a big change that I think in 2026, the disability had to begin before age 26 previously, but now I think it's 46.
It is, yeah, that went up. We've seen this a lot with families who have a child or an individual in their family with a traumatic brain injury, because, those individuals, if they're over 26, they don't qualify for that. The jump in age actually helps a lot of families right now. There's a few limitations that we've got to think through with ABLE accounts, though. I love them. I think they're wonderful, but they play a place in the overall plan.
Right.
There's two numbers that we've got to remember. One is this year, $20,000. So you can't contribute more
annual contribution limit, right?
Yeah, you can't contribute more than $20,000 per calendar year. And every state's a little bit different with the second number, but a lot of states have an annual cap or a maximum cap of how much you can have in it before benefits get shut off. So every state's different with that, but we've got to be conscious of those two numbers. But how I look at special needs trust in conjunction with this is if the parents pass away, obviously there's going to be more than $20,000 that's going to the child, right? And so I love ABLE accounts for short to midterm planning. Birthday money, if they have a job, if the child has a job, money can go in there to shield against losing benefits. But when we think of long-term planning, we know we're going to need a lot more than $20,000. So special needs trust becomes the vehicle of how we're going to get the amount of money shielded that the child needs.
Love it. So we've been talking about all this planning. Let's shift gears a little bit to when the rubber meets the road. Parents are gone. On our end of things, the estate planning side of things, it's not terribly difficult. It's if the special needs trust has been built into the revocable trust, it's like setting up a subtrust for a minor child. And so you go get your tax ID number. You don't have to go get a separate document. That's a common misconception. Yeah, we might do like a certification of trust or something like that for the clients to be able to go and say, hey, here's my tax ID number. I'm the trustee, something that fulfills state requirements. But then it's just going and setting up an account for something like that. So it's generally done within the revocable trust. But yeah, so that part of it's pretty easy. On your side, Phil, what are some of the complications that come up for you? Are there any?
Specifically, like when the parents pass away.
Yeah, when we're starting to fund these things, like, I
Yeah,
mean, what do you see?
it really comes down to the coordination of the plan and the coordination with the future care team. Because, yeah, we've got to have plans that direct the money where it needs to go and make it easy to open up these accounts. But the guardians, the backup guardians, the trustees, the backup trustees, and other people that are going to be surrounding this child, carrying this plan on, have to understand the details of that child's life, what their likes and dislikes are, what their medications are, what their food allergies are. Like, we have a tool that we have created that we use with families to help them document everything that parents know about the child in a way that if something happened, if parents were gone for a long weekend, or if there was a more permanent transition, somebody would be able to step in and know the ins and outs, every single detail about that child, because that's so needed. And that's another detail that's not looked at from a comprehensive planning standpoint. The tiny details end up making a world of a difference for the child.
Yeah. No, I love it. And ultimately, how often do you come across situations where you have siblings or other like stakeholders that are not pulling for the special needs trust beneficiary? I can't imagine it happens frequently, but I'm sure you have some stories around something like this.
Yeah, I would say 90% of the families we serve, the siblings want to be involved in the planning conversations and decisions, and they want to be named as a future guardian or future trustee, and that's amazing to see. But there's certainly some families who the siblings want nothing to do with it, and that creates a pretty big challenge for the parents as they're planning because they don't know who to name as guardian or trustee. And so we don't see it a whole lot, but certainly there's times where we've got to be creative and thinking through who are we naming as a guardian, who are we naming as that future support team for the child.
Right. Yeah. Probably more of a corporate trustee thing for a lot of those occasions, I imagine. So, and then for anybody on this call or webinar or that's seen this go all the way through, generally, a lot of times we're going to see that we've got like the house is there for the beneficiary or for the special needs trust beneficiary. If they're living in the house, maybe they're going to in a care home or something like that. You got all this money set aside. I think that there are a lot of misconceptions about around what happens after the special needs trust beneficiary ultimately does pass. We can both talk about this. I'll let you go first,
Sure.
but what happens then?
Yeah, and that's a misconception with families too. They want to make sure that that money stays within the family if possible. Able accounts, another downside to able accounts, we'll bring that back in, is that if the child passes away, technically Medicaid can come back and recoup the money that they've given to the child. So the money in the able account, if the child passes away, might not go on to who you want it to go to. Same is true for a first party special needs trust, which means it's the child's money through a medical malpractice lawsuit that was won. It's awarded to the child. That child has to move it, or the parents have to move it into a first party trust. Medicaid can come back and reclaim that money. But Mike, what you're talking about is if parents are planning properly, they are making sure that the dollars that they want to go from their estate into their child's trust is moving into a third party special needs trust.
Yes.
And a third party special needs trust, you can name a beneficiary after the child dies, and Medicaid cannot come back and reclaim that money. So 100% of the assets that's remaining in the special needs trust can go to whoever you want it to go to.
Right. And that's where, yeah, estate planning comes back to control. That's the word I always use on this stuff. You're controlling who gets it, how they get it, who makes financial decisions, healthcare decisions, and guardian of any minor kids have special needs trusts, beneficiaries that you have guardianship over. But it's so ultimately the client's estate plan will be what dictates what happens to that money. And you hit on it. Third party versus first party. What we generally see is for these trusts that are built within the revocable trust, those are always going to be third party special needs trusts.
Mm-hmm.
Without a doubt. And so, well, I want to make sure there's not going to be any Medicaid reimbursement. There's not. There's not. I don't care how else you say it. But, and then if you're doing a third party special needs trust, you have to make sure that all the contributions are coming from third parties and not from Phil, what you alluded to was like lawsuit proceeds or something like that. I mean, if those lawsuit proceeds are generally going to be first party type funds because they were paid out to that beneficiary. Yeah, that beneficiary may not be able to touch them, but there's a huge, huge difference between the wording in the first party and third party special needs trust and the Medicaid reimbursements. I guess that's a long-winded way of me saying tread lightly and make sure
Sure.
you're doing it right.
Sure. And we use those words a lot too, flexibility and your word control. I want families to control the overall plan, but also have flexibility to adapt and adjust things as life changes, because we know life is going to change. So the flexibility and control in this type of planning is so important.
And do you see that? I got a good question here. Do IRA accounts count towards assets for a special needs trust beneficiary for SSI and Medicaid?
They do. So if the individual has a IRA, that counts. So just because it's a IRA doesn't mean it's going to be shielded from that $2,000 limit.
Yeah. And we also got a good question. Considerations between establishing an essentially unfunded third-party special needs trust, so setting up one today versus forming one at debt. To me, it's unfunded. If you know that you're going to keep it unfunded, I would argue, why create that trust today if you're just going to fund it upon death? On the other hand, if you have maybe other family members that are going to be contributing and it's going to be over that ABLE account, or you don't want to utilize ABLE accounts, and maybe you're doing some seeding now of that, that's, I think, the time to consider a separate third-party special needs trust.
Yeah.
And you can still have your revocable trust spill into that as well. So that way you don't have two separate special needs trusts upon death. But yeah, that was a great question.
Yeah, I'll add to that piece too.
Please
So
add.
I get this question a lot with families of, do I need one now, or do I need to just have a testamentary trust open up at the time of passing? And for 90% of the families we serve, they are not actively trying to move assets outside of their estate. And right now, they are the trust fund, right? They're paying for the services and the needs of that child out of their pocket. There's no reason at that point to move assets and lose control of them in funding a trust right now. So really the only time that I see a need to actively fund a special needs trust today while the parents are living is two reasons. And Mike, you hit on that. One, if the grandparents want to leave money to the child, but they don't have a special needs trust, we might need to establish a standalone trust to be able to allow the grandparents to name that as a beneficiary. Or if the parents have an estate tax issue and they're trying to actively move money out of their estate, that's another circumstance where we might need to start funding now.
Right. And that's with federal estate tax being at 15 million per person. I mean, I think we all hope our clients have estate tax issues at that point, but with the about 10 to 15 states that have state estate tax, that's definitely a much more relevant issue with no portability and generally much lower numbers. For those of you in Massachusetts and Oregon, you guys definitely know what we're talking about there with I think it's 1 million in those states. So we do have a few more questions that we're going to hit on as they've come in here, but what closing thoughts do you have, or if there's some takeaways that you want everybody to have today from this conversation, what would they be?
I think if you guys are encountering and seeing prospects, or you're currently serving families who have loved ones with special needs, focusing on what does abundance look like for the child. As a parent sitting, talking to a professional, they want to make sure that their child and their future and their needs are fully understood. And so I would encourage you guys to dive deep into that piece alone. It's not just about the parent's retirement. It's not just about life insurance. It's about understanding what their hopes and dreams are for the child. That's going to be huge. But the second piece is make sure that everything is connected. Make sure that when you talk about the trust, or you see that a family has a special needs trust, make sure that the assets are actually going to go to it. I named that one example that I saw, but I see that far too often of the continuation of the financial plan communicating with the estate plan is so important.
Yeah, that's huge. It's great to have a plan in place, but if they're not all operating together, I mean, I just see those disasters just in unfunded trusts in general.
Sure.
Completely defeating the purpose of all the structure you've set up. On our side, the takeaways are it's not very difficult to plan. Well, it's not very difficult to draft for special needs in these situations. I mean, it's templated language for the most part, but just because it's templated language doesn't mean that it's like super easy to do, and it should be done with very little thought around it. When you're doing a special needs trust, even a standalone one, you're really trying to accomplish, or you have 3 questions to answer. Who's the beneficiary now? Who's the beneficiary in the future? And who are the trustees? Because what you can provide, and one other thing on those is that, and I don't think we even hit on the very basics of this. I think most people on the call would know this, but the special needs trusts are there to supplement those state and federal government benefits, not supplant. And so sometimes we hear them as supplemental needs trust or special needs trust. But that's, so for those of you who've heard that term supplemental, that's where that comes from. We're not trying to get rid of those benefits, or we're just, sometimes I'm sure you see this so too, Phil, is that sometimes they're not even getting some of those benefits, but they're just trying to maintain eligibility for those benefits in the event they ever need them. Because if they have enough money, I remember having a special needs trust beneficiary that had 2 season tickets to the Sacramento Kings. I'm in Northern California, and I know some of you on this call would argue, why would you ever want season tickets to the Sacramento Kings? But that's a story for a different day. But it was, he couldn't drive himself, so he had to have a second ticket. And that was for part of his entertainment and those types of things where it was great for him to get out. I mean, that's how flexible these things can be. I purposely use that as an example because it's like, wow, you can really do a lot to fulfill that, just fill that child's bucket.
Sure.
On those types of things. So it's, yeah.
And those little things matter, because if we think about season tickets for an NBA team over a span of years, there's a big cash flow.
Sort of NBA team. Yeah.
Well, I live in Indiana. We have the Pacers, which were amazing last year. This year, second worst team. So I feel you. But we got to make sure that we're accounting for that. So when we talk about what does happiness, fulfillment, purpose look like, we got to dive 5 layers deep and really understand what are those experiences, what are those memories, what are those community involvement pieces that are important to a family, and make sure that we can fund these tickets from the trust if needed. But it takes intentional cash flow, because I don't want the trustee and the guardians to say no to opportunities because there hasn't been intentional planning put in place.
I love it. And so I'll hit on a few more of the questions that are in here. And then if you do have questions, now is going to be the time to ask them. So once we get through the questions, we'll be wrapping up. We've got a question about, do residual able balances have to go to the estate even if SSI, SDI, Medicaid never were tapped? What happens to an able balance if there's money left over?
If there's money left over and Medicaid doesn't take the entire thing, which is possible, then we can name a remaining beneficiary of that able account.
Right. And so and the second point on that was, it might be easier just to use a standard TOD account or something like that than somebody else's name. But I guess that's kind of serving the exact same function there.
Sure.
We got a question about whether or not Encore does irrevocable trusts. No, but we are doing a beta program right now for standalone special needs trusts. And so that's ultimately what that's one of the things that we're talking about a little bit today, and that is going to be the first foray that Encore is going to have into doing standalone irrevocable trusts. The reason we're starting with special needs trusts is because they are so non-controversial. We get asked all the time about irrevocable life insurance trusts or Medicaid asset protection trusts. We are potentially thinking about going down the ILID path. We will never go down the Medicaid asset protection path. I can tell you that very, very confidently. If you are interested if you have a client who you think might be eligible for a third-party standalone special needs trust, you can email support on EncorEstateplans.com, and we can give you a bunch of information on pricing and those types of things.
Mike, I'll add one more thing.
Yeah,
kind of talk about my experience with you guys, if you don't care.
Please.
So I've been doing this since 2009. We serve families across the country. And one of the hardest things that we ran into was making sure that the financial plan worked with the estate plan. And a lot of families that moving into our process didn't have a will, they didn't have a special needs trust, they didn't have the estate plan documents in place. And our job was to find an attorney in their state to be able to draft these. And it was just a nightmare. We had to interview so many different attorneys when we'd have a client in a new state, making sure they really understood special needs planning, because we see what happens when the special needs trust isn't worded correctly. It's not good for the family. But also, what we found was that attorneys didn't allow us as a team who have been guiding a family through the entire conversation and the plan to be part of these conversations. And so the thing that I love most about what you guys do is you guys allow us to have those conversations with families about the estate plan and the importance of it, and help them really develop the framework and the structure. And then we hand it to you guys, and you guys draft exactly what that is and what the family needs. And so it keeps us involved in the conversations and making sure the structure is exactly what the families need based on the previous 5, 6, 7 months of conversations that we've had.
Appreciate that. And it's been fun to do this. When we started doing Encore, this was a definite point of not contention necessarily, but there was, when we were initially launching this early on, it was, should we even be offering something like this as a software provider? To me, it was a non-negotiable. I just distinctly remember when I was in private practice, I mean, we added special needs trust language automatically in like 2007, 2008, because we'd have beneficiaries, or we'd have clients who would do a typical estate plan. Nobody had special needs. but then later on someone did, and they never updated those documents. Or maybe it was like a niece or a nephew who they didn't realize were on needs-based public benefits. In California, where we are, we would have to go to court to then establish that special needs trust. And so by putting that language in there, allowing that conversion of any share to a special needs trust, at least in California where I am, but it's my understanding in a lot of other states too, it avoids having to go to court to establish a special needs trust later on. And so just having that much less friction was obviously a very, very difficult time. Now you've just thrown a special needs trust bomb on top of it for a grieving family. I mean, it's terrible.
Yeah.
And so it's something that take this part of what we do very seriously. We don't seriously, but it's something that it's definitely a passion and something we enjoy helping everybody with. So yeah, that's great. You're right. Any other questions out there? Oh, what shifted in special needs planning since or due to Secure Act 1 and 2? Wow, that could be a whole separate webinar on different things. I guess I'll try to just say that, when you start dealing with retirement accounts and special needs trusts, that is a whole different can of worms. That's going to go well beyond the scope of today. But there are definitely some special considerations where if you're directly naming a special needs trust as a beneficiary on a retirement plan, wow, deal with that much, Bill?
We do. I won't go into the details. That's a wonderful question. We could have a whole nother conversation about that, but it actually is in favor of moving retirement accounts into a special needs trust because you don't have to spend down the assets and the timeline for just a regular individual. So we're able to spread out those distributions longer than just a typical individual. So it's
because the 10-year rule doesn't apply if someone has a disability.
Correct.
If I remember right. Yeah.
Yep.
Perfect. Yeah. So there you go. Secure Act. You're not stuck to 10 years, not a lifetime stretch. Or you still could potentially have a lifetime stretch, I guess, in those scenarios.
Correct.
Perfect.
Well, and that's another thing too. Things are going to
ahead.
change as you're talking to your families and you're naming future guardians, trustees. The trustee piece, it's very important because they've got to keep up with those changes. They got to keep up with, is this IRA treated differently now because of things that are outside of our control? Or are there different government benefits regulations that have changed that the trustee needs to know? So the plan is always evolving, and naming the right people as trustees and guardians is so important for families because we don't know what the future is going to be.
Right. Perfect. Well, I hope everybody got what they were looking for today. If you have any questions, I think what we're going to do, Victor, I know you're still on the call. Are we going to send Phil's contact information to people as well? We do have a poll coming up too. We can send Phil's, we just put it in the chat here, that if you have any questions for Phil, you can hit him up on LinkedIn. We got his email address in there. On our side of things, Phil, thank you for being here. Really do appreciate it.
And feel free to reach out to me. I know you just put the email. I'm happy just to chat. If you guys have questions, I don't have to be involved in the plan that you're creating. If you just have a few questions, I'm happy to give you my thoughts on that. So happy as involved or just being a sounding board to anybody who's on this. I'll also throw this out.
I hope you're going where I think you're going. So I was going to say something, but go.
We're expanding as a team. We're going to be adding at least one more, if not two more CFPs to our team here in the near future. So if anybody's got a heart for what we are doing, I'd love to chat with you. And like I said, we serve families across the country. We meet families on Zoom right here, but we bring all the moving pieces together. I love our work. And so if you're passionate about special needs planning, I would love to talk to you.
That's awesome. Again, Phil, thank you so much for being here. Appreciate it. And everybody who took time out of your day to do this, I really do appreciate you coming. And just don't hesitate to reach out if you do have questions about anything special needs trust related to us. So thank you.
Absolutely.